AB4OL calling CQ, CQ, CQ. Hello CQ, this is Alpha Bravo 4, Oscar Lima calling CQ on the 40-meter band and standing by. This has been a phrase that I have been using for many, many years, in fact over 47 years as an amateur radio operator. Roughly translated, it means that I'm calling anyone, hello, would you like to talk to me? And the CQ being hello anybody, and AB4OL meaning me, my personal call sign. This has been a hobby or an activity that has been the most influence to me ever. Having been a licensed amateur radio operator for over 40 years, I'm often asked, why ham radio, especially now, and so many people no longer do it? They think it's an old person's hobby or something that isn't needed because of the internet. Well, there's an old saying, when all else fails, ham radio gets through. Just review the final episode in the original Independence Day movie. Ham radio operators using Morse code saved the world. Ham radio is indeed the most unique mode in the radio communications field. Amateur radio, also called ham radio, describes the use of radio frequency spectrum for purposes of non-commercial exchange of messages, wireless experimentation, self-training, private recreation, radio sport, contesting, and most importantly today, what we'll talk about, emergency communications. The term amateur is used to specify anybody who is a duly authorized person interested in radio electronics and is practicing exclusively without remuneration. The voluntary nature of amateur radio communications makes it different from any commercial broadcasting or any public safety service. The amateur radio service or amateur service and amateur satellite service is established by an International Telecommunications Union, or the ITU. Through the International Telecommunication Regulations, national governments of all kinds regulate technical and operational characteristics of transmissions, and they all issue individual station licenses with an identifying call sign, such as mine, AB4OL. That call sign will identify to anybody what state I'm in and what country, and I could also find that out by somebody else's call sign real quickly. My call sign is distinctive. Prospective hams are tested for their understanding of key concepts in electronics and the host government's radio regulations. Radio amateurs use a huge variety of voice, text, image, and data communication modes and have access to frequency allocations throughout the entire RF spectrum. This enables communication across cities, regions, countries, continents, the entire world, even into space. With these capabilities, hams stand to assist in any kind of an emergency, every imaginable public emergency. In fact, organizations exist to assist with this. The Amateur Radio Emergency Services, or ARES, is one, and the Radio Amateur Civil Emergency Service is another. Both of these are organizations that have organized hams to help save lives, and they have on countless occasions. These organizations are responsible for conducting very disciplined training exercises. Being valuable, highly valuable assets to any community, many hams are highly trained. For the most part, these hams are self-trained and highly motivated. They're active hams who are very knowledgeable about electronics, radio, and even how they can be of service to their community. So, in times of crisis, who are you going to call? During natural disasters, amateur radio is often used as a means of communications when wireline, cell phones, and other conventional means of communications totally fail. We cannot count on our cell phones to get us through, nor can we rely on our computers. On September 2nd, 2004, ham radio was used to inform weather forecasters with information on Hurricane Francis, live from the Bahamas. On December 26, 2004, an earthquake and resulting tsunami across the Indian Ocean wiped out all communications with the Andaman Islands, except for hams that provided a means to coordinate relief efforts. Amateur radar operators in the People's Republic of China provided emergency communications after the massive 2008 earthquake, and U.S. hams did similar work following Hurricane Ike and countless other weather-related incidents. Hams have been there on the Boston Marathon bombing when the cell phone systems were instantly overloaded, and hams did indeed assist during the 9/11 attacks in New York. The largest disaster responding by the U.S. amateurs community was during Hurricane Katrina. Eventually, strengthening to a Category 5 in 2005, Katrina bought more than 1,000 ham radio operators from all over the United States and some other foreign countries. While there, hams provided emergency communications assistance of untold nature. While their hams were providing emergency communications assistance, so to such an extent that later congressional hearings were held to spotlight that the fact that amateur radio was perhaps one of the few examples of what went right in the disaster response relief. Unlike commercial systems, amateur radio is usually independent of all things that are on land, all terrestrial facilities that can fail. It is dispersed throughout a community without choke points, such as cellular telephone sites that can be overloaded. Flexibility is what it's all about here. It's the key to ham radio. As mentioned earlier, it's not tied to specific channels except for one band. There are blocks of frequencies, and even in those frequencies, multiple modes can be run. Hams bring a variety of radios, antennas, power supplies, and all sorts of communications gear to emergency sites. Many hams use homemade low-power, what are called QRP rigs, to talk hundreds of miles. What other radio service allows this and many other choices to occur? Ham radios are experts in improvising antennas and power sources. Just power off your automobile battery in most cases. Annual field days are held in many countries to practice these emergency improvisational skills. Amateur radio operators can use hundreds of frequencies and quickly establish networks tying together many different agencies to establish interoperability. On the last weekend in June, many hams from Tucson will in fact camp out on Mount Lemmon. While there, hams such as myself will erect antennas, have a really great time, use generators and solar power devices to make hundreds of simulated emergency communications. Come join us to watch or partake. No license required. If you spend any time preparing and learning things you need to survive or serve in the next disaster, ham radio is for you. Don't worry about the little test. You will not be able to use the radio even in a worst-case scenario without a license, though. And you can't train with the radio in the box waiting on it for it all to go bad. Get your license. Get trained. Join us and start communicating as a ham radio operator. The life you save may be your own.